Hello, everyone. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Eileen Linnabery. She is an executive coach and leadership advisor with Vantage Leadership Consulting. She's actually presented across four very diverse and important topics at this year's SIOP. Everything from ethical dilemmas in pro-social work to succession planning, coaching impact, and board effectiveness. Eileen brings a sharp, field-tested perspective, and we're eager to explore how her work intersects with the evolving landscape of organizational diagnostics, especially considering platforms like Entromy that aim to translate insights into action. Eileen, thanks so much for joining me.
Yes, thanks, Matt. Good to be with you.
So here's the first kind of question. In your session on ethical dilemmas, you introduced this situational judgment as a way to kind of uncover how values play out in real time. At Entromy, we sometimes detect similar tensions through open-ended feedback, early warning signs that leaders may not be aligned and the culture of values with the culture of values in practice. In your view, how can diagnostic tools help organizations spot these issues earlier, and how do we ensure they're acted upon ethically?
We have a lot of different diagnostic tools that can support organizations and decision makers in these sorts of dilemmas. The nice thing about culture and situational judgment style measures is that when we're talking about leadership, behaviors, organizational effectiveness, we're not talking about a math problem of 1 + 1 = 2. There may be a whole host of ways to get to the intended outcome, and we may not even really know ultimately what that outcome should be when we embark. So tools like a situational judgment test gives you, here's a situation that we have in the organization. Here are some ways that an employee or a leader may respond to that situation. And you can ask people to manipulate those ways. Choose your favorite. Choose the one that you think is most effective. Choose the one that's most likely to be how you would respond. Put these in order of what you think is most effective to least effective. Put these in order of what you would be most experienced with as a response versus least experience. And so the depth of information that you're getting, not just around is someone choosing the right answer on a math test of 1 + 1, but how are they thinking about these things? And typically we set up these style of measures so that there's no obvious right answer. They all sound plausible. Like this is something that could actually happen. But what the applicant or the test taker may not know is one of these is dead wrong for our environment, right? I work with franchisee organizations, for example, and the way you tell the field what is going to be done when the field reports into you as a VP versus when they're buying your brand as a franchisee is very different. So if I give you a situational judgment question about that, you may choose, this is what I think is the right answer. And I say that is the one that's going to make the franchisees the most upset. You asserted dominance as opposed to creative partnership, right? You told them from top down. Now, am I going to decide not to hire you or not to bring you in for that opportunity? Maybe not. Maybe that's not that important. We have other indicators that you'll be successful. But boy, won't I be better at helping you onboard and hone in on what are the things that might trip you up if I know that you think the obvious way to do things is the way that's going to anger everyone in our environment.
Insightful. I can certainly see how the situation kind of predicates the solution. And so that's, the point of situational judgment test. Let's talk CEO succession. So you presented a nuanced view of succession in today's economic environment. One of the ways Entromy supports clients is by surfacing internal confidence levels in successor readiness and leadership trust, particularly post-close in PE settings. How do you think org-wide insights could complement traditional board or executive level assessments? And what should decision makers be paying closer attention to?
I think decision makers should be paying closer attention to their internal talent, just blatantly. We're seeing an interesting trend over the past decade, maybe now 15 years, where more and more CEO placements are coming from the outside. I think most recently, Spencer Stewart said it was nearly 30%. 30% of CEO placements are coming from the outside. Is that because we, as a leadership development community, have failed to grow people internally? Is the person across the street really better served for this opportunity? I have to assume not, right? Because those people are being grown somewhere. I have to assume, and my hypothesis is that boards don't have the same level of data and there isn't the same level of rigor in comparison of their internal talent to their external. When you're looking at your external candidates, they're getting references, they're maybe taking in-depth assessments, they've gone through several rounds of interviews, and in some instances there's an unwillingness to put internal candidates through those types of ringers. So you're using different proxies. For example, we'll do a 360 on this person. Great. So now you brought in the reputation, but did they get interviewed by the board? Does the board know this person's background as closely as they know the external candidates? So to your point of, if we had more organizational understanding, information, and data, just think about who's outpacing others, which department, which team, which leader, and does the board really have their eye on those people? We shouldn't be thinking just about the next CEO appointment, but the next 2 to 3 CEO appointments. We're thinking generations into your talent pool. Does the board or whoever the decision makers are for those appointments have that lens? If not, then I think they certainly should.
Eileen, I appreciate you sharing that stat. I'll have to do some homework on it, but I do know that there is research around comparing kind of internal candidates to their influence and impact on culture, and then bringing in an external person and kind of what that does to the culture. They could be a really great CEO, but it sometimes backfires due to the culture impact. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors, but that's an interesting point that you brought up.
And sometimes the board wants a change in culture. They want a different strategy. I worked a few years back with a healthcare organization where the CEO was in place for 20 years. He was long tenured, and he did a great job preparing the next level. He had probably 3 reasonable successors within his management team. Like people you would actually look at. Were they already? I'm not sure, but he had several reasonable replacements, and he had prepared them. But the board did not want someone who had been there and learned under the CEO who just had 20-year tenure. They were afraid that these folks would just bring more of the same. And they had a great 20-year run. I don't want to make it seem like they didn't, but CEO appointment is a great opportunity. It's perhaps the most consequential talent decision that an organization is going to make. And so they wanted a different opportunity. It really didn't matter how capable those internal folks were. They were looking to shake it up. But did they really understand the implications of what that meant? We're now 3 or 4 years into the new CEO, and it would be interesting to ask the board, did you get what you sought?
I think that just goes to kind of highlight the contextual nature of a hire. Some CEOs might be better prepared for maintaining status quo. Other CEOs might be better at that shakeup, as you put. And so it really kind of depends on what maybe the board thinks the business needs. I want to shift gears here and talk about coaching. Coaching is another area that you've explored deeply. And so at Entromy, we've seen a lot of growing interest in measuring coaching outcomes by tracking changes in alignment, clarity, and even confidence over time. From your research and your expertise, what's needed to make these outcomes more measurable? And how might diagnostic platforms help close that gap between intent and impact?
When we think about coaching outcomes, you mentioned some internal like meta skills, I would say, confidence, right? Like if we improve your confidence, we can theoretically improve your performance around a wide variety of different performance domains. Similarly with self-awareness. If we increase your self-awareness, we should be able to increase your effectiveness across a variety of performance domains. So from the measurement standpoint, we really want to think about what is best served as measured by the person who's experiencing coaching, and what is best served as being measured by others. The person who's experiencing coaching has unique insight into their own cognitive processes, how they're thinking about things, how they're making meaning and making sense of the work world around them, that their colleagues can only infer and their coach can only infer. But the colleagues around you may lack the bias that the coaching recipient or coachee has about what's actually changed. If I've spent 6 months with you and you've poured your heart and soul into thinking about the way that you'd like to show up, how truthful are you with yourself when I ask you to evaluate that? Are you telling me the truth, or are you telling me what you hope to be true? What the story you're telling yourself? So that's really how we think about the measurement, is who is best served to represent this outcome. Is it the coachee themselves? Is it the coach? Sometimes the outcome is better, faster, more engaged than others, right? If we're thinking about a high potential program and we're trying to confirm if this person is high potential, one of the ways an organization might do that is ask the coach, how'd they show up in coaching? A high potential person should be maximizing their coaching. They should be taking success to the next level. They should be outperforming others once they get the resource, right? So sometimes that might be the measure that you're looking for, but who is best served to measure it? The other thing that I would say is very often we stop there. Matt's peers said that he is better at X. Matt's coach said that he is outperforming peers at Y. Matt self-reported that he feels better about Z, and we stop there. That proves that the coaching is doing what we said it would do. Behavior change, mindset change, whatever we had laid out as the goals. But that doesn't actually say that the coaching is making an impact and returning on its investment. From there, you have to go a step further. So if Matt's more confident in improving performance in these domains, what domains, what performance changed, what does Matt attribute to that? And what does Matt's sponsors attribute to that? So I'm working with an executive right now who's working on building a highly classified item. And she and I are working on delegation, of all things. Is her being better at delegating actually improving the outcomes of this highly classified item that she's building, manufacturing for the first, she's the design team, so designing for the first time. You know what? I can say yes. I can say that it is, because we've gone through that level of rigor to understand what is she actually doing and how is that impacting the outcomes. Ultimately, the short story here is, because she's delegating more, she's spending more time with the customers. And she's been able to fend off some negative opinions by those customers and some legacy problems that have fueled this item that she's designing. And the customers now believe that they're in good hands. Right now, I don't need to say much more to the CEO of this business than that. Right? That is business impact from coaching, but that's not the coaching promise. I certainly didn't make a coaching promise around what the customers were going to think about this product. But if we dig far enough, we can understand what the actual business impact is. And her coaching has had a role in it.
So what I'm hearing from your response is, and I'm a little bit inferring here, but it sounds like there needs to be almost a mutual understanding of how the coaching is going to be measured, probably before you start the coaching, to make sure that maybe you're focused on the right things and the coachee is applying it appropriately. Is that fair to say?
Yes, exactly. What gets measured gets done is that old saying, right? So why wouldn't we want to be clear? What are we aiming towards here? And that's going to help us have precision on the 3, 6, 12-month route, however long you're coaching.
I'm happy you said 3, 6 month. I mean, obviously, if that's how long the coaching is going on for, you would expect there to be some continued progress. But I always find it interesting to maybe check back in 6 months or 12 months after the coaching is completed to see, hey, did these things really stick? Was it just kind of like we know maybe it's a Hawthorne effect situation where they know they're being observed under a microscope, but the reality is that they're just going to go back to their old ways, or maybe they do make a change for the better in certain aspects.
We see a lot of folks who may backslide in their coaching 3 or 6 or 12 months after the engagement has ended. Was that person actually acquiring skills, or were they acquiring solutions to today's problems? If we're working through today's problem and you and I figure it out, and you go implement and execute that solution, and then you come back tomorrow with another problem and we figure that out and you go implement and execute that solution, what happens when that coach is no longer in the loop? It's important that the coach is not integral to the process of you having the solution, right? So it's really important that we're embedding the skills for people to solve their own problems, and that's how we can create that sustainment. Of course, environments change, and sometimes we go back to old habits nonetheless, but what is the role of the coach in those interactions to build towards not being there?
That reminds me of the old saying, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for the day. But if you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a lifetime. And that sounds like the kind of coaching that you're providing is more of the thought process and the decision making and the, hey, let me try and give you some tools, not just for now, but maybe for the future as well. That's great. Eileen, I want to talk a little bit about your session around boards. And so in your session on board self-evaluations, you suggested that boards should be evaluated as a team. We recently rolled out a portfolio dashboard that gives investors a structured view of how aligned leadership is across their holdings. How do you think a structured insight like this might influence how boards reflect on their effectiveness? And what could be the broader impact for portfolio companies?
I think having that level of clarity of alignment would be very powerful for boards. If we assume a board as a dynamic system, some people are coming in, some people are coming out, some have long tenures on this board, some have shorter tenures, different relationships with the key sponsors. We may make some assumptions about alignment that actually aren't true when we lay it out black and white. The other thing is that most boards that we work with are a collection of highly skilled individuals who are coming together for some sort of governance or oversight or strategic and investment advisement. But they don't often think about themselves as a team. Back to old adages, a team is stronger than its individuals, right? What if we did? What if boards were thinking about maximizing their collective input for the better of the organization, as opposed to being a great board director myself or great board chair myself? There's a lot of opportunity there. And typically, forward-looking boards are doing really strong board evaluations, board self-evaluations. If you're required, if Sarbanes-Oxley applies to you and you're required to do your self-evaluations, it does not require the quality of that evaluation or what's being done or who's managing it. But really forward-looking boards are thinking about themselves as an entity and how are they adding outsized contribution to the organization that they're advising and leading, as opposed to simply oversight, governance, reporting.
There's a difference there. It sounds like there might be some defense and installing those corporate disciplines. And then there's the offense, which is maybe more of that innovation and forward thinking that comes into a board. And so I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other. If you're a sports fan, you know you need defense and offense. We may have an argument on which one's more important, but the point is that you need both, right? For a board to be effective. So, Eileen, I want to zoom out here for a second. There's a broader movement within industrial organizational psychology to make organizational data not just smarter, but actually more humane. As we build tools like that here at Entromy that translate complexity into insight, what would your call to action be for the next generation of organizational diagnostics? How do we build tools that empower and elevate people, not just measure them?
Yeah, what a compelling question and what a great vision for the future. I hope we do achieve that in the next generation. I think what we've seen as of late is a renewed focus and interest in inclusion and designing for people who may not be privileged with as a certain majority group. And so if you think about when the American with Disabilities Act came out, what was that, 1991 or several decades ago, we started seeing more curb cuts in the streets so that people with mobility issues could traverse their neighborhoods more easily. People on roller skates, runners, people with strollers, shopping carts, they've all benefited from that. So the focus of the design was on the group of individuals that were going to have the most problems traversing that environment. The, folks who have mobility issues trying to get around their neighborhoods. Designing for them actually helped a whole host of other people and hurt no one. The people who can high step with the best of them are not pained by having the curb cuts that ease them into the street easier, right? That it hurt no one. So that would be the design approach. We spend too much time starting with the old architecture phenomenon of the referent man, He was a 5'8" or 5'10" white man, and that's why the couch I'm sitting on isn't the right height for me, right? Because I'm not the size of the referent man. So who are you designing for?
Very interesting. I love the analogy about the curves. What a beautiful picture, kind of illustrating maybe the power of a small thought, helping maybe initially targeting a marginalized population, but the broader impact, everybody wins. And so it's an amazing story. I appreciate you sharing that. Just wanted to say thank you, Eileen, for sharing your insights and pushing us to think a little bit more critically about how we measure, interpret, and then obviously act on organizational data. Your expertise underscores the importance of nuance, ethics, and context in every stage of the employee and leadership experience. I just wanted to say I'm really inspired by you and your work. The conversations like this remind me of why diagnostics must do more than just inform. They must enable change. Look forward to continuing the dialogue and exploring ways to bridge that academic rigor with real world impact. Thanks.